Hello, everyone. I'm going to do my teach the book presentation on Sex and the Nazi Soldier, Violent Commercial and Consensual Encounters During the War in the Soviet Union from 1941 to 1945. This is a book by Regina Mulhauser. She describes it as a book that is meant to kind of change the way that historians think about sexual encounters during the Second World War. So we're kind of gonna go by chapter, and we'll kind of go over what she talks about in each chapter, and we'll see what she has to say. So the first chapter talks about sexual violence. She mentions that the feminist movement in the 70s kind of kicked off a lot of this research of this particular topic. They look into both the issues of sexual violence during both peacetime and wartime, but obviously, wartime you see a lot more of it on a much larger scale uh, in like public population. So specifically, some of the major like recent conflicts that she talks about in the book have to do a lot with the wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s, Rwanda, and the genocides against the Tutsis. Um, the Specifically, the wars in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, um, they've had a lot of like public attention. The UN has, uh, the UN and both the international criminal courts have had tribunals, kind of discussing these violent sexual acts that have happened during these conflicts. Specifically, the one for Yugoslavia. We'll talk about that one first. The picture actually you see here in the slideshow is a victim of she's a Bosnian woman who was attacked by Bosnian Serbs and raped. She was one of possibly 12,000 to 50,000 women who were raped during this conflict. That is a guesstimate number, that 12 to 50,000. The European Union puts the number at around 20,000. The numbers are kind of up for debate, but still, it's a lot. The same group of people, the International Criminal Courts, had another tribunal as well for the attacks in Rwanda. This one is pretty horrific as well. About 500,000 women and children were raped, sexually mutilated, or murdered during this conflict. Um, so obviously, it's not something that's kind of gone away after the Second World War. It's really almost, I don't want to say it's gotten worse, but it's uh, it's still a problem that we see in conflicts today. Especially this part of the chapter talks about how these tribunals have reasserted that sexual violence is a war crime, a crime against humanity, and also an act of genocide. Um, so, in these wars of conquest, you see these acts a lot. Specifically, obviously, in this book, she talks about the German troops invading the USSR. And she specifically mentions that the women were and girls were taken as prizes. This is something that we see like a lot in all sorts of violent conflict throughout history. So obviously that hasn't changed too much. Um, and then the chapter also ends with various accounts of Jewish women being raped from by German soldiers and even like German police after their capture. So she starts to introduce these early accounts of rape during the Second World War. And then sexual transactions is the next chapter. It talks a lot about sexual bartering in the Ukraine, actually, which is obviously something that we see uh, in today's news. As Ukraine is a very hot button issue right now. And actually, the she talks about a book called Kharkiv, which is one of the major cities under attack by the Russians right now. But it was written by Olena Zuchina. she speaks about the German occupation of the city during the Second World War, and how the women in Ukraine during the occupation would sometimes offer sexual favors in order to gain favor from the Germans. This is a form of like prostitution, um, not so much in the way that like professional prostitution, which is also something she speaks about in this chapter. It's a little different, but in both in the USSR specifically, professional prostitution was kind of something that was it was um, not really legal, but it wasn't prosecuted under the new economic policy introduced in 1921. Um, said that sex workers would no longer be like convicted. Um, so they that kind of sex trade began to thrive again in the USSR before the war, and then obviously during the war, um, prostitution would be something that we would see a lot. On kind of the other hand, though, in Germany, the German secret police would conduct patrols in cities to find those being considered to be prostitutes, and they would charge them kind of based on the context of the Nazi criminal prevention measures. So you kind of see like the really different ideologies between the Russians and the Germans when it comes to prostitution. That's something she kind of speaks about throughout the whole chapter. So the next chapter, it's actually not titled "The Health of the Soldaten," but it kind of was like the main point of the entire chapter. I felt like the health of the Soldaten is this idea. Soldaten is soldier in German, but kind of the idea that German soldiers were supposed to be these like go along with the Aryan healthy, white hair or white blonde hair, blue eyes kind of idea of a German soldier. So the commander in chief, Walter von Brüsten, talks a lot about the sex life of soldiers in the field in a letter titled Self Discipline. He talks about sex in occupied territories and how it wasn't exactly prohibited, but it was. He offered that they should be restrained when it comes to that. And he said that the reason for this, if no moderated heterosexual opportunities were provided to soldiers, it would lead to both acts of like outbursts of sexual violence and homosexual acts, which was something that the Germans didn't exactly like want per se. Um, in a letter to German High Command called "Beware of Sexual Excesses," it goes. Here's a little excerpt of it. Sexual excesses they diminish your performance and are not beneficial to your health. A soldier with a venereal disease is unfit for duty. Self-inflicted invalidity is unworthy of the German soldier. Um, so obviously, this is something that would have been distributed to German troops before being deployed to wherever they would be heading out to. And it also talks about the infection of sexually transmitted disease was referred to as a threat to the entire body of the German people. Like especially during this time period, you see a lot of um, like the idea that the German people as a whole are one person. So obviously, a infected German soldier would be a problem. And in terms of consequences, the men could face consequences for remaining silent about if they were infected. So if it came out that they were infected and they weren't properly fulfilling their sanitation duty or willing to provide information on how they got it, they would be treated with disciplinary measures because they had a duty to remain healthy. This was introduced to the German army in like 1939, so right before like, the kind of major conflicts break out. Okay, so consensual relationships. This chapter obviously speaks about some consensual relationships that occurred between German soldiers and various like women in occupied territories. Um, how much consent there was is kind of really up for debate. Especially in this book, she talks about it a lot, how most likely there wasn't a lot of them. German propaganda obviously played it out to be that there was way more than there was. Um, this photograph actually is a picture of German soldiers dancing with women in Norway. I know we talked a lot about this week about photographs and how they can be kind of made to say whatever they want. This photograph most likely was specifically like skillfully arranged to send a message. There are, especially in this book, talks a lot about like pictures of Soviet women that were like specifically arranged to make it seem like the German soldiers were welcome. So these this is also another like type of relationship. The fried potato relationships referred to relationships that were like provided with external comforts without involving like serious commitments. So any sort of like act that would gain you favor with a German soldier. Um, it also this chapter talks a lot about the motives of women, which I kind of spoke on earlier, that probably a lot of it wasn't consensual in the way we think about consent. Um, And then finally, it ends with a letter from Vladimir Polinsk. He's a Belarusian partisan who recalls that every German soldier and every officer had a girl they had a fling with. Our Russian girls were invited to their evening dances. Everything here was like peacetime. So this kind of reinforces the idea that these like set up dances were occurring. The occupation children. This chapter had a lot to do with like German birth rate throughout occupied territories. So in 1928 to 1933, there was a problem with birth rate being low in Germany, Poland, England, France, and Italy. But Germany had by far the worst. This was referred to this like idea that the German people were going away was Volkstag, called like it means the death of the people. So like it's like a idea of the loss of the German race. Frederick Bergdorfen was a leading demographer at the time in Germany, and he warned of like this really adverse balance of death rate versus birth rate. This forced Himmler and his SS leadership, who would end up writing a like a pamphlet called "The Birth Rate Decline and Extortion of the German People." It promoted the birth of children with Nordic hereditary disposition, and this came out as early as like 1935. So this is really the beginning of the idea of German like promoting German birth. And finally, the Rolf Schmidt's handout. He was a commander of the Second Panzer Division. Gave a handout to Hitler and German High Command that 500,000 Soldatenkinder, which would be translated to soldiers' children, would be born in the East. According to Schmidt, about 6 million troops were stationed in the East. About half of them were having sexual relations, he said, with occupants of like the occupied territories. He also, the German High Command said that Schmidt should also like uh, not exactly create countermeasures to this. It kind of it was seen by the Germans as a way to prove that their great warriors of the German people were superior to their enemies by having relationships with occupied women. That the women that would be occupied would rather sleep and have Germans bear their children than any of the people who were occupied. Of course, he didn't take into the fact that these women didn't want to bear these children and rape was commonplace. Um, so that kind of is what the book goes over. This is just our discussion question, which I'm sure we'll go over in class. I can talk more about it then. Overall, the book was pretty interesting, but I definitely want to discuss more of it in class with you guys. So can't wait to do that.